Hello and welcome to Honest HR Nitrous. I am Bill, the company's expert, and I see that I forgot to update all my little thumbnails here, but that's fine. This is the live stream that I do actually a couple of times weekly now, where we talk about the hiring process, we talk about job applications, interviews, offers, hiring, and employment, including other things like networking, basically anything under the sun, business related, especially employment related. And we tell it like it is, you know. Let's admit that there's a difference between the party line that people often repeat and what we see in practice. So that's what we're here to talk about. The title of this episode is the recruiter your friend? I bet you've got your own thoughts on this. If you're seeing me, this is an interactive live stream, so there's a chat box. So get in the chat and you can make comments, you can ask questions, and I can see all of that. So if you have anything that you're wondering about, anything you're struggling with, let me know and I'll do my best to help you out. Special thanks to my YouTube channel members. You guys are awesome. To my Patreons, to my super thanks donors. You guys are awesome. And to my participants, I see there are 8 people here right now. Thank you for joining me today. If you're looking to get hired and you're wanting to discuss like the process and how it kind of really works, that's what we're here to do. I found that there's a lot of self-serving kind of stuff out there. And, you know, a lot of it's benign, but there's some stuff every once in a while that's kind of a little malicious, where people are misleading a lot of job seekers. And it's very self-serving. So that's why I wanted to do this. And the response so far has been actually really, really great. It's great to see people sort of tuning in for this and watching it on replay also. So there you go. So today we're going to talk about, is the recruiter your friend? Now, I'm just going to talk about this while people are showing up. Get in the chat, because beyond this, I don't have any kind of plan or agenda of what to talk about. I'm going to be responding to your questions. So we'll get into it. Is the recruiter your friend? Here's the deal. A lot of recruiters, when they give advice, they position themselves as being your friend. And the reality is that you have as a job seeker, you have a very complex relationship with the recruiter, because they are your friend in large part, but in some ways they are your adversary. Now, there's a whole discussion about like the, I don't know what you would call it, the incompetence of recruiters or the maliciousness of recruiters. Things like fake jobs, for example. A recruiter posts a job and there is no job. It's just some kind of underhanded, borderline unethical way of doing market research, or labor market research, or lining up candidates to possibly replace someone if necessary. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that stuff exists. That would be an example of what I'm talking about for like malicious recruiters or unethical recruiters. There's a whole discussion around that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about in the hiring process, when you go to a job interview, for example. Is the recruiter your friend? In one sense, you want to cozy up to them, you want to be honest with them, you want to work with them, right? Because you do have some goals that align, right? They want to hire the best person for the job, and they are hoping you're the best person for the job, and you want to give them what they're looking for so that they can select you, right? So in a sense, you have the same goals, but in some other ways, you are their adversary. They are your adversary. For example, the salary discussion is a clear example of that. They want to pay you as little as possible, and you want them to pay as much as possible, right? So you have completely opposing goals. So in that sense, they are not your friend. They are your opponent. So as you can appreciate, it's a very complex relationship to tiptoe around. And I'm going to get in the chat very early on here because I see there's some people in there. Hello to Dennis. Hello to Ahmed. Get in the chat. Let's hear your thoughts on this and we'll go from here. Dennis says, I used to think yes, now I think no. Yeah, I can understand how you would think that. Once you have been out in the real world and you have had interactions with some recruiters, and some of them are good, but a hell of a lot of them are bad. A lot of them are borderline incompetent, if not crossing the line into complete incompetence. A lot of them are rude. A lot of them are unprofessional. A lot of them are disrespectful. Now, sometimes it can appear that they're being rude and disrespectful when they aren't, okay, simply by virtue of the situation you're in if you're rejected or anything. But a lot of times, I assure you, they are indeed being rude and disrespectful. And it's a very unprofessional way to behave and to represent your organization. I mean, this is widely known. And like I've said previously, I mean, I've met people in real life that have a chip on their shoulder even bigger than I do about certain companies that they interviewed for that handled that exchange very poorly. So much so that the person in question, makes it almost a personal mission to not only not work for those people ever again or in their career, but to do everything they can to put them out of business. I've met people that have said that to me, and they've backed it up by giving me a laundry list of their actions to that effect. And you are not cynical. You are not, overly suspicious if you hold that opinion. This is one of the reasons why job search is so frustrating and depressing sometimes for a lot of people, because you're being treated like this. Ahmed says, I was watching your videos 10 days ago to prepare for an interview. Today I got an email with an informal offer. Your content is helpful. Thank you. You're absolutely welcome. I'm glad to hear that, Ahmed. I'm glad that things are working out. They get paid to hire the best. It is in their interest then. Well, that's what they say. Yeah, that's one of those cliches. We hire the best, we leave the rest. That's something that many people say. Usually it's false. And it's explicitly false because, I used to teach recruiters in university, in the business program. I did some HR courses on recruitment and selection. And recruitment selection as practiced, now in this modern age by large enterprise, it's not really geared around necessarily hiring the best person. It's geared around hiring the least risky person. That's the goal, right? And a lot of the principles that currently, and it's not just current, they've embraced this stuff for quite a while, but a lot of the principles behind how they make decisions, as far as I can tell, they're not proven. You know what I mean? And it makes sense because intuitively they sound like they're not true. You know what I mean? Like for example, they don't want to get to know you. It's too labor intensive to really get to know candidates, especially for worker level jobs. So what they do is they ask a lot of these cookie cutter questions that have been around forever. They've been around for decades and decades. Things like, tell me about yourself. Why should we hire you? What are your salary expectations? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What are your weaknesses? Things like this. They ask these cookie cutter questions, and the end result is they're not really surfacing, the things that show great, exceptional talent or suitability. It's skewed heavily in the favor of rapport, so it's biased towards people that have a lot of charisma, and that's partly due because in the case of recruiters are not trained in the subject matter of the jobs they're recruiting for, right? So if the recruiter is hiring an engineer, the recruiter themselves doesn't know anything about engineering, but yet they're having to screen out like who would be a better engineer than whom, right? It's kind of silly in a way. And the way they do that is they play on stereotypes. So they ask you these cookie cutter questions, and then they make assumptions based on stereotypes some of that stuff actually does kind of make sense. It's like you're playing on the law of averages. Usually that would suggest this person is this, right? But yet it's still an assumption. You know, that's not necessarily the case, right? You know what I mean? It's so some of these things are not really proven, and they're playing on the law of averages. So the problem is, if you're a perfectly average person, then there's nothing abnormal about you or atypical, I should say, about you. Then maybe it would succeed in assessing you correctly. But it's very rare that you find someone who's completely in all ways typical. You know, we all are individuals. We all have things, you know, maybe non-standard career paths or non-standard talents or non-standard interests or non-standard personality quirks, right? The other thing is that a lot of recruiters tend to be extroverted. At least that's my observation. That's not based on anything other than my own observation. So another principle at play is that we tend to value people that have the things that we ourselves have the traits and background and characteristics that we ourselves have. So if you're extroverted, you tend to look more favorably upon extroverts. If you're introverted, you tend to look more favorably on introverts, right? So it's heavily skewed towards extroverts and towards having a lot of personal charisma and being completely average, because then these assumptions they're making turn out to most likely be correct, right? If you are atypical in some way, their assumption about you will most likely be wrong, and therefore, it's going on false information now. David says, regarding telling your weakness, the other day I remember you said to tell something like, no real weaknesses come to mind. I don't feel I have major weaknesses that ever impacted my job performance. Should you adopt this approach or telling side effects of your strength as a weakness? Well, it depends on the context. I don't remember. I vaguely remember saying that recently. I don't remember what the question was or what the context was. No, I recommend giving the answer that I've put in several videos when asked, what are your weaknesses or what is your weakness? I just covered that answer earlier today in a live stream, like maybe an hour ago. That's the answer I recommend. It's basically a side effect of a strength, an understandable side effect, because you don't want to give any actual weaknesses, because although a lot of recruiters claim that they just want to see that you acknowledge that you have weaknesses and you're working on them, in practice, it doesn't usually work out like that. Usually people use your weaknesses as a reason to eliminate you. So that's why I wouldn't say it. But what you're referring to, I think, was some kind of special case where they asked you a pointed question and said, do you have this certain kind of weakness, or do you feel that this is a weakness? There's some specific question that I think was the context of that discussion, in which case I would say I wouldn't fall for the trap. I would say, no, I don't, no weaknesses come to mind, for that particular thing. So it isn't like one or the other. It depends on the context. But if it was just a general question, what are your weaknesses? What's your greatest weakness? Then I would say the understandable side effect of a strength, and then give a reason how you're mitigating it. That's the answer I advocate for. Ahmed says, David, I don't think that's what he recommended to say. He said, mention a strength that has a drawback and then talk about how you fix it. Well, potato, you're both right. It's an understandable side effect of a strength. So for example, if someone says, what's your greatest weakness? I would say something along the lines, like this would be the you can fill in the specifics based on what's applicable to you. But for me, it would be something along the lines of, well, I have great attention to detail, and I care about the accuracy of the work I do. Okay, that's a strength. But occasionally it means that I'm not the fastest worker, because accuracy and attention to detail do take a little bit of extra time. However, I mitigate this by always making sure that when I'm given a task or entrusted with a project or something I have to do, that I have a verbal conversation with the boss initially, so that I understand the timeline and the expectations of how long this is going to take. And if I feel that it's going to take me a little extra time to do it to my satisfaction, to the level of accuracy that, you know, is consistent with the quality of work I deliver, I make sure that I have that time. So I never end up actually submitting anything late. So it's never an issue. Yes, that's very long-winded. If I had a moment to think about it earlier, I would have said something more elegant. But it's that kind of answer. You give a weakness. My weakness is I'm slow. But it's understandable considering I'm like doing a great job. And I make sure that the fact that I'm slower never actually creates a problem. There you go. That's how I would answer that. Doesn't mean that's the only thing you're ever going to say. Like I said, if someone puts the screws to you and asks you a very specific question, do you consider this a weakness, or do you have any weaknesses related to that? I wouldn't fall for it. I would say, no, I don't. I don't, because anything you say is going to be used against you, right? In that question, it's a trap question, right? And the problem is that you might be honest and be authentic, and you give we all have weaknesses, so you'd be able to say something legitimate, and that I'm working on it and all this, but they're going to choose a candidate, one of your competitors, that didn't give anything negative. All they've heard in the interview was all positives, and the candidate did not give any negative things, and they'll get selected over you. That's what I've observed quite a few times. Okay. It isn't, a job interview isn't a confessional. It isn't like, how are you doing on this? And then, I'm not doing too well. I still have problems. It's like, no, you do that kind of stuff, you're making a very bad first impression. Just don't answer my perfectionism, at least explicitly. Yeah, that's one of the things you don't say. I mean, it's like, they've heard that one before, right? What's your weakness? Well, I'm just too good. People are intimidated and I'm embarrassed, and, it can lead to some pretty awkward situations, just having me around. Don't say stuff like that, because they're not going to buy it, right? So, yeah. But no, I mean, that's a classic example of like where the recruiter is your adversary. They're your opponent in this. They're trying to uncover the dirt on you. They're trying to find the negatives, right? See, when you put in an application, it's the sort of like, PR version of who you are. Like, I'm amazing at this and I'm amazing at that and I'm the perfect person, right? Now, these people aren't completely stupid. They know that the reality is probably not as good as the marketing hype on you. So they have to choose between you and several other candidates. So the way to do that is like, let's see through some of the, the marketing presentation, the sales pitch on each of these people, and let's see what's really going on with them. Let's see what their weaknesses are. Let's see if we can find some red flags or find some things that show them not in a good light, right? That's what the recruiters are trained to do. So they use questions like this to do that, to try and get the dirt on you. This is the king of those questions. What's your weakness? It's like saying, if I was going to eliminate you, what would be the best reason I could possibly have to eliminate you? What is that? And you say, well, if you're going to eliminate me, it would probably be because you'd have found out that every boss that I've ever had does not get along with me and does not enjoy working with me, because I'm very argumentative, and I found that I got a real problem with obeying instructions that I don't understand. So if my boss asks me to do something and I don't really understand why I'm doing it, and it doesn't make sense to me, I really got a problem with that. And I argue and I question, and and a lot of bosses don't appreciate that. So if you were going to eliminate me, it wouldn't be for my technical skills. It would be for that, right? So the moment you say this, most of the time you're pretty much guaranteed to be eliminated. Right? And the job instead goes to someone who tactfully wriggles out of that trap by not giving something incriminating, right? This is where recruiters have been very lazy. And I'm not beating up on them here. Fair is fair. This process doesn't really allow you to get to know the candidate. So you have to go off, like one interview, you have to get to know someone in like a half an hour. You can't. Especially when they're like on their defensive because they know this is a very artificial exchange, right? You're asking these cliched tin can questions for a start, and they've got a ton of like well-prepared answers that they've rehearsed in advance. Very artificial, right? Ahmed has sent a super chat. Thank you very much, Ahmed. That's very kind of you, and I'm glad that you're getting something out of this. Ahmed says, I admit I was going to give a very honest answer to what's your weakness question during the interview, but I'm so glad I watched your video. It probably saved my chances. Never done this before, but that's a little to show how much I appreciate what you do. Well, thank you very much, Ahmed. That's once again, that's very nice of you. Yeah, this is the thing. Recruiters, you don't want to go in to a job interview, for example, with this mentality that, they're your adversary and you're going to refuse to cooperate with everything. I mean, that will get you eliminated in itself, right? You want to cooperate with them. They're looking for reasons to hire you. They're probing for those, and you want to give them those, right? So that's where you and the recruiter have the same goal, right? And you're helping them to understand why you're awesome. You're helping them to understand what you could bring to the role. You're helping them to understand how you would be as an employee, what your communication skills are like, what your charisma is. You want them to see all that. And, you and the recruiter are probably two different kinds of people, right? Unless you happen to be a recruiter also, you probably are not coming from the same place they are, right? So you're wanting to work together so that they're looking for value in you and you want to give them that value. So you have the same goal. But there's just a couple of moments in a job interview where you want to hold back. You want to remember, okay, now these people have an opposite goal. They're probing me to see if I got any red flags. And when that happens, I don't want to play ball. If they ask me to be honest about my strengths, I'll be honest, right? And the more authentic I can seem, great. But the moment they're trying to probe for weaknesses or red flags, then no, I'm not going to cozy up to you. I'm going to keep my best game face. I'm going to try and deceive you. I'm going to try and obfuscate all my weaknesses and only present you with a very rosy picture of me and what I bring to the table. And I hope that you buy it, right? Because you're my opponent, David says, if you show a near perfect picture of yourself in the interview, doesn't it imply that something is wrong with the candidate? Well, it depends how effective you are at it. If I give you, look, by definition, if you can fool somebody, successfully, then it's believable, right? Now, if you present an image where everything is absolutely perfect, you've never made a mistake and you have no flaws of any kind, is that believable? I would say no. I agree with you that would be a little bit too good to be true, right? Now, let's pretend that they then try and probe you for flaws. They want to say, okay, well, come on, there must have been, tell me about a time you didn't get along with somebody. Tell me about a time you had a disagreement with your boss. Tell me about a time you failed on the job. Tell me about a time that, you did something and it went wrong, but you learned a great lesson. Right? You see, they're throwing this stuff at you, right? And the whole goal is for you to say, yeah, I screwed up on this, and I failed at that. And because of a flaw in my personality, I didn't get along with that person, right? That's what they're trying to probe for, right? But let's pretend that you deflect every single question, right? And they're left with this impression that like, well, it sounds too good to be true, but I can't get any dirt on this person. Everything that they said kind of holds up. They give the perfect answer every time. And, or you throw them a bone and you say, well, I got this little thing, but it's so trivial and it's so understandable that it's not really a weakness. Maybe you do that, and that's what makes it convincing, right? So yeah, you got to, I don't call my mother as much as I should, something like that, right? Like, I'm making a joke, of course, but you get it? And they go, there it is. Okay, so yeah, you're human. But they're not hearing anything that would disqualify you. Right? Now, maybe you believe that the recruiter is so wise and prescient that they would be able to see through any kind of false impression or story. And maybe you've encountered such a person. I haven't. Maybe they exist. Maybe it's a little arrogant to think that, you can always fool a recruiter. These people, they do job interviews for a living. You know what I mean? Like they've done many interviews, many more than you. So especially when you walk into the interview and it's on their turf, you're out of your comfort zone. And this is these people's bread and butter. You know what I mean? You might be at a bit of a disadvantage, right? However, remember, you have advantages too. Maybe the recruiter doesn't know anything about the content of the job. They're hiring for an engineer type role. And they're not an engineer. They studied HR, not engineering. You are a fully qualified engineer, So, you have some advantages too, right? Pofcross, is that how you say that? Pofcross. If you took a year break due to burnout and are trying to get back on your career, how do I explain that? Also, if you are spending time learning to change the field in your career. Okay, great question. Here's the deal. In the world of recruitment and selection, the stuff that recruiters are taught, okay, there are a lot of questionable things in there, okay? Things that they think are real, but I, for one, would question. Now, several of them, I've never seen these principles ever proven. Like in business or in sociology, I'm unaware of where they've proven these principles. Okay? Even things like, in economics, where they have these different theories of what makes the world work, right? They have some evidence to back them up, so they're validated, but yet they contradict other theories that are also validated, right? So the reality is kind of a combination, right? In HR, the way this stuff is presented is that there's never any peer-reviewed backup to some of these principles. That's what I found by teaching it. So it leads me to question whether these are true, because some of them sound really fishy to begin with. One of them is what you're asking about right now, the whole work gap thing. Okay? Now, my understanding of the principle is that let's pretend you have a work gap. That means that you haven't been employed for, say, a year. Now, sure, you could tell them, the reason for that was because of this. That was intentional. I felt burned out, or, maybe that might be incriminating. Maybe you don't even say that. You just say, I took a break. I had to deal with some family stuff, whatever, right? So you explain it away, right? But from their perspective, they realize that, that could be a lie, but we really would have no way of knowing. There's no way we could discover why you really were not working for a year. Now you say this, but we just met you. We don't know if you're lying or not, so there's some uncertainty there, right? So the theory goes that if no one was hiring you for a very long time, that could suggest that there's something wrong with you. Like there's some negative aspect, negative trait. Maybe you're not actually as accomplished as your resume says, or maybe you've got some personal issues that once, someone wants to hire you, they realize that, you've got a, pathologically bad temper or something and they can't work with you. Maybe there's a reason why nobody's rushing to get you. So to play it safe, we should also leave you alone, right? That's the theory. That it's like, once again, it's assuming that their goal is to hire the least risky employee, not necessarily the best, right? That's what their goal is, to hire the least risky employee. That's what everything is geared to. It's stupid. Is the least risky employee the best employee? No, we have no data on that. In fact, we have data that points in the opposite direction when you look at the rising rates of employee turnover that we have across the board in every industry. So, right? So that's kind of the issue here. Now, if you took a year off due to burnout, okay, you're having to explain this. So the conventional wisdom is, first of all, you don't admit that, like, I did nothing during that year, okay? Because according to these theories that they have been told are true, that makes you a very risky candidate, right? So you would have to justify it by saying you were doing something productive that year. So you could say instead of taking a year off due to burnout, I took it to reevaluate my skills and update my skills. So I spent that year in training. I went back to school, right? So that year isn't a loss. It's simply you went back to school. Instead of working, you went to school, right? Now, if you took something that was relevant to this job, then it's perfectly fine, right? So that justification will avoid like the pitfall that they're looking for, which is that, there's something wrong with you. It's like, no, it was a conscious decision to go back to school. Now, if you hypothetically had like some educational qualifications, you could say, I got these during that year that I took off, then it would seem to justify it. They can verify that you indeed have these, and that seems to validate your story that you went back to school, right? So what I say for people is, like, this is a game of cat and mouse. Personally, I don't want people to lie outright. I think that's just unethical, and it is a bad thing. You don't want to do that for a variety of reasons. But you can exaggerate. You know what I mean? People do that all the time. I have absolutely no problem with that. So if you're in that situation right now, I'd recommend you go back to school. Like, go take some free online courses or something, so that when they ask you about this 1 year gap in your career that you have, you could honestly, legitimately say, during that year, I went back to school and I got these qualifications, among possibly others. Or you could not mention them. You say, I went back and I got training in these areas. And now that I have those, I'm ready to rejoin the workforce, and it makes me more capable, more valuable as an employee working in this area. Right? And it's not a lie, because you have gone and gotten educational qualifications, right? Maybe you spent the previous 11 months deciding which ones to get. I don't know. I mean, hey, but you did get them. So it's not a lie. Right? Now, anything else you can say in that, you did volunteering, you did some kind of productive thing, that would also be a legitimate justification. Okay, so that's how I would handle that kind of thing. Does that make sense? That's the long-winded answer for you. And you say also, if you are spending time learning to change the field of your career. Listen, if you're talking about changing careers, like where, you worked as a coal miner for 10 years, and then you decided to work as an insurance salesman for the next 10 years, like a career change, chances are you will, in my experience, my opinion, based on my experience and observations, is that it's a really tall order to change careers by going through a recruiter for a posted job. Because recruiters, when hiring for posted jobs, what's their universal metric? It's years of experience, right? How many years of experience do you have? And if you're going for a job that you've never had before, you're applying to be an insurance salesman, and all you've ever been is a coal miner, the first question out of their mouths is going to be, how many years experience do you have as an insurance salesman? And you're going to say 0, right? And then the next thing they're going to say is, well, then how do you think you can be an insurance salesman if you've never done it before? I'm sorry, you don't seem qualified for this, right? So you're competing against maybe other applicants that have 10 years being an insurance salesman, right? So it's going to be very hard for them to select you, to pick you over them. So the way you change careers is you don't go through recruiters and you don't apply for posted jobs. You go the networking path. You talk to someone, either you reach out to a company or an employer, you talk to the person in charge, you ask them a bunch of questions. Most people will not be interested in that. Some of them will be. So for the ones that are, you go down, you talk to them. You ask them questions all about their industry, what they're doing, what they think of where it's going and how to do it right and all this kind of stuff. What are the big issues that are going to be coming up in future? And you show interest and you listen. And by the end of that conversation, they'll love you. And if you kind of understand and you can talk shop with them a little bit, they'll feel that, you know what you're talking about, And then if you were to approach them later and say, hey, look, I've been thinking about changing careers to do this. If you ever have anything that comes up, please let me know. Some of those people will give you a chance because you've never been an insurance salesman, but they know you, they've met you, they know what you're talking about. And they know that you get it because you were asking very interesting questions about the industry. You were responding. They had a good conversation with you and they enjoyed the conversation. You made them feel important. They also got a sample of how professional you are, how good your communication skills are, and you showed initiative enough to reach out to do this. That shows that you're passionate about doing it. So it's not about talking a good game. It's about demonstrating these things for them. So that's how you get your foot in the door to change careers in most cases, and they'll give you a chance. Okay, that's how that stuff works. Ahmed says, I'm now in a situation where the interviewers liked me and agreed that I'm their preferred candidate. The recruiter reached out saying they will make an offer soon. Okay, that's good. It still doesn't hold any water, but it's encouraging so far. Income has not been negotiated yet, and I don't know the range. What would you recommend? Do I have more leverage that I'm negotiating after being their preferred candidate? It goes on. There's also the recruiter's personal conviction about whatever situation they assess in the candidate. Okay? I don't understand that exactly. The salary thing is, I can't just explain it all in like a minute. It's even more involved. I've talked about it recently. Like I did a live stream on this, I think last week, or was it on Monday? Like I talked about salary very recently in the last few days, where I went deep just into salary, just into how that stuff works. So I would watch that. I can't really repeat it all now just to answer this one question. The very quick version is nothing counts unless it's in writing. Okay, so if they're just talking and they're saying, an offer is coming, you're our lead candidate, like none of that stuff really matters. If they haven't actually given you anything yet, they haven't given you it yet. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Like if they're trying to get you to indicate what your salary expectations are before they've given you an offer, it's the same thing like they're asking that question in a job interview. You respond the same way. So go watch my video on that. It's like that 3-part answer, where you basically don't fall into the trap. Like, if you don't give a number. If you give a number, you're screwed. You don't know how high they can go. You don't know how low they can go. I don't care if they've told you what their range is. You don't know if that's legitimate, and chances are it isn't, right? They're your opponents in this. You're not working with them anymore. They want to get you for as little money as they possibly can. You want to get them for as much money as you can possibly get, right? It's an adversarial type situation. The more you talk, the more information you give, the worse it is for you, okay? Let them just take the best. Like what you would like is just, I'm not going to give you any information. You pay me what you think is fair and make me an offer. I will be happy to entertain any offer you give, right? Personally, I would not say like market price or anything like that, because once again, you're giving yourself a number, right? And there's all kinds of problems with it. So, the strategy is the same one in a job interview. You don't disclose. And in an interview, they can put the screws to you and say, like, you must give a number, even though that's not true, by the way. You don't have to do anything, right? I know that they would like you to give full and complete information about how much money you take or how low you can go. That's what they're wondering. But you don't fall into that trap, because the moment you say, well, I'll go as low as this, then that's what they offer you, right? You want them to think that, oh no, we're worried that they might reject this, so we're going to give them a higher amount, right? So you don't play into it. Okay, so go watch my videos on that. I've talked about that extensively. And all that business about you being the preferred candidate, that's all talk. You don't know if that's true or not. It could be a tactic. And if it was, it plays perfectly into their goal of making you want to work with them on this, which is not to your advantage. How do you work with them? You become more accommodating. How do you become more accommodating? You a smaller amount of money. That's not in your best interest. AJ Singh says, got an interview tomorrow. Okay. Had a gap last year, went back to school. Okay. Good. I hope it works out. Ahmed says, it is positive reframing? What do you mean by that? There's also the recruiter's personal conviction about whatever situation they assess in the candidate. I don't know what you mean by that, or positive reframing. You're welcome, Poff Cross. I'm glad that was at least somewhat helpful. Bob Masavo says, what do you say if you took a year off to recover from an illness? Well, it depends on the context, but under most circumstances, I don't think that there's a reason why you shouldn't just say that, if that's the honest reason. The only risk factor is that if you were sick, and you were sick where you needed an entire year to recover, it might make you a riskier candidate, because if you got sick before, if these people hire you, maybe you might get sick again and then immediately have to go off on disability for another year, right? Like that's what they're going to be worried about, right? So, excuse me, God, it's an occupational hazard. That's why I drink a pink drink, pink lemonade. I'm in the Arctic here. That's what it feels like. It's cold outside. So if I drink pink lemonade, it fools my brain into thinking I'm poolside in Las Vegas or something with a pink drink, pink lemonade. Yeah, so if you had a year gap and you were sick, that would be their concern. That's where that could count against you, right? Because once again, risk for an employee also extends to going off on disability and like health issues and stuff like that, or accommodation. Now, officially, in some places in the world, in some circles, they're not supposed to consider stuff like that. I'm a bit cynical. I think that just because they're not supposed to doesn't mean that they don't, right? And if you're going through a recruiter, they're trained, they're zeroed in on looking at things like this, as opposed to if you were doing, if you're talking to a hiring manager through the networking route, they might not be zeroed in on stuff like that. Their big question is, can you bring something to the role, right? So I don't know if it's possible to sort of put their mind at ease and say, like, I was sick, it was like this, but it's a one-time only thing. It doesn't recur. This was all officially under doctor's orders. I was officially diagnosed, and, I was ordered to take a year off. I underwent treatment, and, now I'm fine. And it's not going to be a problem ever again. That's the prognosis. Something like that. I would volunteer that kind of stuff if you can say it truthfully. Okay. Now, if there's any other reason you could give, maybe it was for an illness, but also you were doing other things. You were wanting to take more training or something. I would not say this first if there was any other legitimate justification for the year off. But if there isn't, then I would say this, and I'd be sure to emphasize that it was a one-time only thing. It's not going to be a recurring thing. Poff Cross says, same career, but different area or field of practice. Okay, what's that in reference to? I don't understand. Was that something you said earlier? Okay, a year break. That's the year break thing. Okay, I see. You're adding to the story we talked about like a while ago. I don't think that matters. I don't think that affects my answer, as I recall, for that story when we talked about it like a while ago. Ahmed says, give a wide range. I remember the video. Yeah, that's if you have to answer. That's if you have to give. Now, if you're not in an interview, you know what I'm saying? There's no social pressure, right? You see, you're stranded in a room with these people in front of you, and they're pushing you for an answer. There might be some social pressure to say something. So that's why you would give the range. If the interview's over and they're just talking to you on the phone, the correct answer for almost anything on the phone is, I'll get back to you, right? Don't feel any pressure to like have to respond to something in the moment, right? You want to think about things before you say them, right? You want to think about your response. So they can't put you on the spot if it's on the phone. You can always just say, like, listen, that's very kind of you. I would have to think about that, so I will get back to you, by maybe tomorrow or in 2 days or 48 hours, you'll hear from me, something like that. Like, or you just say, well, I can't be any more specific than I already have been about the number. Okay. So I'll be happy to entertain any offer you do give me, but I can't give you, I'm unwilling at this moment to give you a range. Okay. Or a number. Mario says, or if you're American, Mario, right? Says, my girlfriend recommended your videos to me. They've been, I'm a big hit with people's girlfriends, by the way. So that's good. That's good. It comes from drinking the pink lemonade. Just so we're all on the same page. You should think about it. They've been very useful. Thank you. I had an interview today. Wish me luck. Well, good luck, Mario. And I hope it works out well for you. And you can thank your girlfriend from me. Give her my love. Bob Masavo says, get an umbrella for your drink and fool your brain. Good. Oh, yeah, if you're going to do it right. That's what I'm saying. I'll wear my Hawaiian shirt and kick back. Straw hat, shades. Pofcross says it was a reference to the above question. Well, yeah, but what's the above question? There wasn't an above question. What you said immediately prior was, thank you for your answer. And then if I go up further, it was the question that says, if you took a year break to the burnout. So that's why I was confused. So hopefully you didn't ask something that I'm not seeing. If that's the case, I apologize. If that's the case, but repost it if there was more that was supposed to be in there that I didn't get. Okay, I don't want to leave you hanging there. We've reached the end of the feed. That's it. That's all you guys are saying. So is that where this ends? There are 26 people. Thank you for joining me today. If you are looking to get hired through a variety of different means, because there's a variety of ways of getting hired, and you want to talk about the process and some of the silliness of the process. I know that people's experience deviates from the party line about how this stuff is supposed to go, right? There's some recruiters out there and others, hiring managers, doing pretty odd things. Some of them underhanded, some of them is an ethical gray area, some of them are downright rude. And this doesn't help. And it's a real roller coaster of emotions for a lot of people, especially younger people that don't understand really this process. That's why I want to talk about this stuff with people, because I feel a lot of young people, they're not prepared for it. They come out of school and it really seems like they're not prepared for the realities of the world or for job search. The biggest obvious thing is they don't seem to have a clue about networking. I mean, that's how most people get hired. You'd think that somewhere along the line, people would have taught this to people when they're around 18 years old or, by then. And then when they come out, they have some conception of how the world works and what you might have to do. You know what I mean? Especially introverts. Nobody's taking them aside and explaining this stuff and explaining how decisions are made and how to show someone your value, how to illustrate for them so they understand why you're valuable, what you can do for them / their company. Okay? Okay, good. I'm glad, Pop Cross. Okay, you have one more. That's coming. Mario says, are questions about hobbies and pastimes tricky? First of all, it's none of their damn business, to be perfectly honest. I think you probably realize that. If you go to a job interview and the first question out of somebody's mouth is, they say, hey, thanks for coming down. It's great that you're here. It's good to meet you. So, what do you do for fun? Right? And in a formal job interview, when they say stuff like that, you can be sure that it's a strategic question. It's not this harmless, let's, chit chat and make small talk kind of question. It's strategic. They want to get you to start going off your script and start talking about things that you hadn't planned for and, all this kind of stuff, right? You can be assured that that's what they're trying to do, So, I don't know. I mean, if that was me, I would give a very short answer. It would be very generic. And, I'd say I have several hobbies, that kind of, as we all do, and I like watching movies every now and again, that's pretty much what I do. And then that's it. You shut up and then you let them get on with why you're here, is to talk about a job, not some retarded hobby, you know what I mean? Because the more you talk and the more you go off script, the worse it is for you in these type of situations. And every once in a while, you get a real prize idiot that thinks that this is a legitimate way of getting rapport with you. You know what I mean? You're in a formal interview. Maybe there's a recruiter, there's a hiring manager, there might be a whole line of people across the table from you, and they're there asking you about your hobbies, wasting everyone's time. It's the most artificial, formal, crafted exchange where they've got a list of cookie cutter questions that they must ask in order. And some pretentious person kind of thinks that, oh yeah, I'm going to get them to lower their guard by asking the strategic question about, hobbies or whatever. Is that am I coming across as cynical in any way? But no, I've seen them do this. I've seen them plan this kind of stuff. I've seen professional recruiters discuss this before interviews. It's not just paranoia, even though it might seem that way. So they're tricky in the sense that you want to deflect. It's that's not what we're... You might have half an hour with these people. How many minutes of that is going to be taken up talking about retarded, irrelevant things like hobbies? You know what I mean? And if they think that in half an hour, the best use of their time is to ask you about hobbies, I think that speaks for itself about the suitability of these people to be in that role. So you deflect. You give a very short answer so you don't waste time on questions like this. You give something that's very non-incriminating, something that's like typical. I don't know, I follow sports. You know, maybe you're in a town where there's like a big team, you know, in whatever sport, right? You say, I'm a fan of them. I watch their games. There you go. There's your hobby. You know, you say it in a very nice way, but that's what you say, right? Very innocuous. There's your answer. Okay, now, you know, can we get back to discussing this job, which is why I'm here. Right? You might even want to turn it around. You know, yeah, I watch. Do you watch? You know, do you follow them too? You know, see what they say. You know, and you go, great, awesome. Okay, I'm ready for the next question. So that's Mario. Leo Sunshine says, what advice can you give to stay motivated in a toxic work environment while waiting to get a better job? That's going to be a challenge, Leo. Whatever I say or whatever anybody says, it's not just going to magically be easy. Okay? One thing you can do is to just disengage. Like, it's just like, tell yourself, like, it doesn't matter. None of this matters. You know, like, my days here are numbered. Doesn't matter, you know? And so you stop becoming emotionally invested in the work you do or in the relationships you have with the people there. Easier said than done. I know, but it can be helpful to like tell yourself this as like a mantra. It doesn't matter, you know? And then walk the talk. Like, don't, you know, you tell yourself it doesn't matter, but then you get all excited and all like panicked and all interested in something that just happened. You know what I mean? You have to sort of like, whatever, you know? Very challenging, especially if you have to deal with like a toxic boss or toxic coworkers. There is no, for me anyway, I haven't found a way that magically fixes that. You know what I'm saying? Very challenging. Okay. To stay motivated. Like, I don't know if you can. Is it possible to be motivated in a toxic environment? You know, the best I think you can hope for is just to be able to function in a toxic environment. I don't think you're going to be motivated. I think it's certainly for me. I don't know about you, but for me, I think it would be too much to ask that you feel you should be motivated on, you know, in that environment. And then you're mad at yourself or dissatisfied that you're not motivated. You know what I mean? I think that's too much to ask for a lot of people. Focus on your job search activities. Focus on those. Don't focus on your current job if it's toxic. Focus on, like, you know, how your job search campaigns are going and what you're doing to get more opportunities lined up for yourself. Bob says, I've never had any issues talking about my hobbies or pastimes. Good, yeah. It doesn't typically come up. It may come up in job interviews, but it's not a standard thing. Pofcross says, if you took a year break to starting applications for school now, should I mention that in job searching as well? Pofcross, can you rephrase that with a bit better grammar? Is that possible? Because I'm having problems understanding precisely what you mean. It can help if you just simply shorten your sentences. One idea per sentence, you know, and then the grammar doesn't have to be absolutely perfect for someone to understand what you're saying. Rephrase that. I'll be happy to answer it. Bob says, I put a few of my hobbies at the very end of my resume. It makes me look more human and provides some good talking points that you won't get drilled over. Okay. Makes sense. I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't have a problem if people did that. Like, it's neutral. It will help some of the time. So sure, makes sense. The problem where you see, everything you say that isn't directly pertinent to the role can be a liability, right? And I've said that in one of the more popular videos on this channel where I talked about, you volunteer all this stuff and you say, oh yeah, I root for this sports team. Little do you know, the person you're talking to is a major, major fan of the opposing team. And once they hear that, they're like immediately biased against you. It's stupid. It's petty, but it happens, right? And that's just an example. You see, people can have any and all hangups you can imagine. And the more you start talking about random things, the more risk there is that you're going to say something that, unbeknownst to you, is a big red flag for them. They don't like that, right? So, that's the risk. But I mean, is it a significant risk you should be worried about when it comes to this? Maybe not. Ahmed says, interview as if you are Nicola Machiavelli. Yeah. I'm going to have to do a search on how he looks like. Because, you hear like Machiavellian, scheming, sly, kind of plotting. But I don't know what he looks like. If he's got the mustache he can twirl or, Maybe you just looked like Nicola Machiavelli. Maybe that would affect your odds. Unconventional advice that works. Students are taught about the value of networking, but too many dismiss this good advice. Yeah. Well, okay. The thing I've seen is that they don't seem to understand what networking is. Because supposedly they're taught about networking, but then at the same time, you suggest that they reach out to people in companies and they're like, not only are they shocked that that's what you're asking them, they immediately think, oh, that's not possible to do. Then they think, well, it might be possible to do, but who am I to talk to those people? It's inappropriate for me to talk to them or to even reach out to them. That would be inappropriate. And if I try, I'll get my head bitten off, for daring to speak to them, or something. Like that's what I've always encountered, especially like 20-somethings. And this is teaching in university. I mean, I'm not an academic. I'm a private sector guy through and through. But as I've mentioned several times on this channel, I went back and did some teaching part-time a few years ago for about 5 years, ending in around 2021, 2022, somewhere in there. And it was a very eye-opening experience going back into academia. I hadn't been in a university since I was like a student years and years ago. And just weird world, living in like a weird bubble. And it extended to things like their understanding of networking. It really gave me the impression that no one in the entire university ecosystem, maybe apart from like high-level professors, possibly the ones that go and do work for like, private business and stuff, had any clue about what networking actually was and what you could do with it. I'm sure in business school, some of the professors there really understood it, but you know what I mean? But most people didn't. Certainly the administrators didn't. In the community colleges, they didn't. And I know this because I pushed to get it into the curriculum in the business program, and they did. But there was so much pushback on it. David says, is it better to let the recruiter offer a salary or give you a range? Because I think if you let the recruiter decide on salary, they may go down to a low salary. Oh no! Oh no, what if they offer you too little? That means you must accept it, right? No, I'm obviously being facetious, David. And I don't mean to be insulting, but listen, you can't control them. They could offer you a laughably ridiculous salary. They could offer you something below minimum wage if they felt like it, right? They could offer you whatever they can offer you peanuts, bottle caps. You know what I mean? But only you get to decide what you accept, right? And you have the right to say absolutely anything in response that you want. Now, keep it professional, but you have the right to make any counteroffer you want, right? That's the reality. Like, you can't control what they offer. You don't even have control over what they think is reasonable. Maybe it's a no-win situation. They can't go high enough to meet what would make sense for you. Like, let's say you're working right now at a job that pays you 75, okay? And the highest these people could possibly go would be 60, okay? But they believe that someone who works in this role should only be paid 30, okay? So they offer you 30, and you're making 75. You know what I mean? Like, obviously the answer is no, right? Now, you can make a counteroffer and say, like, okay, well, look, how about 85? I would entertain 85, right? It's not about persuasion. You know, they could go as high as 60, but they say, no, okay, we've thought about, you know, what you said in your counteroffer, and we've generously decided to raise our offer to 35, right? Like, well, the answer is no, right? You know what I mean? This is not about persuasion, right? They want to get you for as little as possible. And the reality is that your reservation price is 75. And if you factor in risk, the risk of changing jobs, it would be something like 85. Because you got 75 in the bag right now. If they want you to quit your job in the hopes that this job is going to work out, that's some risk you're taking. You could end up quitting this good job for 75 and jumping into a situation that you turn around and they fire you a week after you start. So you just lost both jobs. There's a risk of that. So you want to be compensated for the risk. So you'd say, okay, well, I'll do it for 85. Because if you're just going to pay me 75, I might as well stay here, right? At least I know this is in the bag and I know I'm working out, right? You have no control over what they offer. The only control you have is what you accept. Okay? So keep that in mind. These people can offer any kind of retarded thing. That's great. But the only thing that gets accepted is what you say gets accepted, right? So if they were to offer you something low, who cares? If that's what they feel, okay, that's enlightening. But as long as you know that you can't take the job for anything less than, say, 85, as long as you know that, you've done your side of it. The rest is easy, okay? If you have no options, if you have no job and you need money and you have no other prospects right now, whatever they pay, you say yes, right? And then you start. And then if you feel like you're still being paid less than your potential, you start immediately embarking on another job search campaign to see if you can get something better. That's what you do. My apologies if you already know all that, but I'm just reacting to like, oh no, what if they ask this? It's like you have no control over what they ask. And it doesn't even have to be logical. They can understand perfectly what you're saying and what you're worth, but they're going to see if they can still get you for this low amount. So they're going to ask anyway, right? Even though a normal, intelligent person wouldn't say yes, you never know. Maybe you're so hell-bent on working there, or maybe you're just so easily led and manipulated and intimidated that, you will say yes. That's what they're hoping, right? So you have no control of what they say. Doesn't matter. Now, if you have told them that, oh yeah, I would be happy with 35, and then they offer you 35, and then you throw it back in their face, you say, absolutely not, that's nowhere near. Then there could be issues. It now seems like you're going back on your word. This is why you don't want to give numbers, right, in the process. That's why at the very least you give them a range. It would be preferable if you don't say anything, but you at least give them a range. So I never committed to this low number. I said, anywhere between 30 and 80, or 30 and 90, somewhere in there. I'm sure we can find, you're not tying yourself to 30, so it works. I'm being a little overly hard on you, David, but hopefully you get it. I understand completely. Because it's very intimidating. These people try and intimidate you with these kind of tactics, and it works. It works. They manage to scare people into lowering their salary demand. You know what I mean? They offer them less, and then people feel the pressure to just say yes. And then they take it, and they're working for far less than what they should be. And the recruiters get away with it. That's why they use these techniques, because they're very unsophisticated, but a lot of people fall for them. Puffcross, clarification. It took a year break due to burnout, starting applications for further school degree while simultaneously seeking a job to get back on track with my career. Should I disclose that? I think the less said about the career gap, the better. You see, this is where you don't want to go into detail. You want to just, in a perfect world, you would not devote any time to this question. You would say one thing that just sort of justifies it, and then they go, okay, and then they move on. That would be the perfect scenario. The more you end up talking about it, the more detail. Well, here was my motivation, and here's how it turned out. And, I had to change my plan because there was a development. And then the more you give them like that, the worse it goes for you. And the more time is taken up on this question, instead of giving them reasons to hire you, and the more they're paying attention to this issue, right? So I would not go into any detail unless absolutely necessary. I would just give like a general, concise justification, and then shut the hell up, and then let them move on. That's what I would do. And then if they probe and they try and well, tell me about that. Why did you do? I would adopt the same strategy. I'm not going to give you a ton of detail. I'm going to give very sort of short, general answers, so that that they explain it away. It makes sense, so that we can move on. Right? And when you think about it, it's none of their damn business what you did. Just like when they ask you, what did you do with some other employer? It's like, really, it's none of their business what you did with someone else. A lot of those questions, are you accepting, or have you gotten other offers from other employers? That's none of their damn business. They're not entitled to that, right? You can disclose what you feel like disclosing if you choose to, but they don't have the right to know all the details, right? A lot of people don't realize that either, so they buckle to social pressure and they just end up answering all these things, and it doesn't go well for them. Puffcross, my apologies regarding grammar. I was watching you and typing my question in your phone. Don't worry about it at all. As long as I can understand you so I can answer. That's the only thing that's important. Took a year break due to burnout. Took a couple of certificate courses, and now seeking a job to get back on my career track while applying to schools for a further degree in a relevant field. Okay, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, that makes... I wouldn't mention the burnout part, but apart from that, I think that's all pretty harmless to say. Makes sense. People grow, people change, people learn. Like, you go back to school and you do things... You can't always do everything while you're working full time. Some people take a break and they go back to school, So, yeah, I think that's pretty harmless, especially if what you've done relates to the job that you're now interviewing for, right? Bob says phone grammar will get you every time. Yeah, I know. I am at a disadvantage being an old guy because, I can't keep up with the latest... abbreviations and expressions and stuff. That's why ChatGPT is helpful. That and Google, and I'm sure you guys have used the Urban Dictionary. All these resources are good. It helps fool us older people into thinking that we understand what people are saying when we don't. So, Bob is talking to Puffcross, and Puffcross is talking to Bob. David says, when preparing job applications, is it acceptable to go beyond the job description to demonstrate knowledge in related areas and broader expertise? Oh, you're going to love this, David. It is acceptable, yes. Is it helpful? No, it isn't. See, this is the problem. The ego is very real, and we have stuff on our resume or in our background that we are proud of, because we know that this thing that we have is awesome. It's maybe something that not many people have. It's maybe something that demonstrates great qualities about us or shows our capabilities, right? But the problem is you're not justifying yourself to yourself, you're justifying yourself to them. And they only care about a very specific thing. We want to hire you to do this, you know? Now, I get that you're very proud of the fact that, you know, you're a veteran, or, you know, you also have a degree in medicine, or, you know, you climbed Mount Everest. Like, I get that, you know, but quite frankly, this job in customer service, the fact that you climbed Mount Everest doesn't really have any bearing on this customer service job, nor having a medical degree. That's not really going to give you any kind of edge in this job. It's completely unrelated. So the more you go down to a job interview and talk all about how you have a medical degree and you climbed out Mount Everest, right? Or both, that's going to be a distraction. They're going to get the impression of you that this job is not a fit, because instead of being a customer service rep, your real calling is being a mountaineer or a brain surgeon or both, right? So that's the problem. And it's going to dilute what you have that speaks directly to this job. The ability to talk to people, you know, blah, blah, right? Now, if you can take the fact that you climbed Mount Everest and like spin that in a way that shows them how it demonstrates why you're being an awesome customer service rep or something, then maybe it will be applicable, right? But my point is, what they're looking for ideally is somebody that fits the requirements exactly and doesn't dilute it with a bunch of other things, because for several reasons that takes away. It dilutes what you have. It creates uncertainty if this is really the job you're looking for. It creates uncertainty. It's really like, you know, what your skills are tailored to. You know what I mean? So don't fall into that trap. It's very hard. This is easier said than done. But you might be proud of a bunch of stuff. If they're not specifically asking for it and it doesn't come up as an example of how you can illustrate something for something that they are looking for, keep it to yourself. Hard to do, but that's the reality. This is the flaw with, this is another one of those flaws I mentioned earlier with the modern day recruitment process. Because we all know that the more things you have, the more diverse experience, education, skills, they always help. You know what I mean? This is a stupid concept. Oh, this dilutes that. Like, you know what I mean? The only time where it might not is if it shows what your ambitions are. Like, if you really wanted to work in customer service, why do you have a medical degree? You know, like, that suggests that what you really want to be is a doctor, you know? One could be forgiven for getting that impression. Right? So this is how these people think. If you're going through a recruiter, this is how they think. They think that this is a real concept that applies universally. And that's why you have to dance to this tune if you want to impress a recruiter. Right? Now, if you're not going through a recruiter, you're going through networking and you're talking directly to the boss, right? You know, you might not even mention you've climbed Mount Everest or whatever, you know? All they know is that you know your stuff when it comes to customer service. You had a great conversation about customer service. They've seen your charisma, they've seen your ability to listen and blah, blah, blah. So they, you know, that's the only thing that's relevant. But if you're going through a recruiter, then concepts like this start to matter, unfortunately. Okay, where do they leave off here? This thing jumped on me again, and I think I was here, like with David, when preparing job applications. Is it acceptable to go beyond? Yeah, okay, here we go. Ghosts says g'day and company expert and chat. Well, g'day. G'day. Is this like an Australian thing? You call that a knife? Ghost said career gap could be COVID related, so I would stay away from that too. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's so stupid. You know, it's like speaking as someone who's been a hiring manager, if somebody said like, look, like I had a year off because of COVID, the company was laying people off, no one was hiring, and then on top of it, I got COVID. And then I recovered, and I was applying for jobs, but absolutely nobody was hiring. Everybody was laying off in this industry. And, I eventually found something 12 months later. I'd be like, okay, But no, but in the world of recruitment, they have certain hang-ups about things. Oh no, you weren't hired, so maybe that suggests something bad about you. So we don't know, so we should regard you as a higher risk candidate because of that. It's like so stupid. Now, maybe for some people it's valid, but for a lot of people it isn't, and they're just going off a stereotype. Bob says, the company's expert, okay. Okay. Ghost says, climbing Mount Everest while working as a remote customer service rep. Yeah, in this imaginary world that you never know. If you just joined the conversation while I was halfway through this hypothetical example to illustrate my point, it must have sounded weird. Bob says, all our customer service reps are in the Mount Everest death zone right now. Please hold. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about this, but there's that like band where you've got all the bodies, right? That's the scenic route, right? And then they have one on K2, which is even more pronounced, right? All I remember is green boots, right? I don't know, like you mentioned certain things and like YouTube like instantly demonetizes your video, your stream. I've fallen into that before, so hopefully it wasn't one of those. Ghost says, I will never list all of my excessive degrees on a job application because those degrees only show that I can sit in a classroom for 3+ hours. Okay, if you say so. I mean, if you had like a degree in medicine or a degree in law or something, or a degree in engineering, I mean, those aren't Mickey Mouse degrees. They tend to suggest you have certain qualities. You're highly trainable. You've got a very fierce work ethic. You're very disciplined and you're very bright. You can wrap your head around pretty complex ideas in a very short amount of time. Like that's what some of those might suggest. So that could well be true for you, but I don't think that's a universal thing that everyone should adopt. Hoffcross says, you missed my question again. Okay, well, what was your question? Career gap could be COVID related, so I said that. You were talking to Bob Masavo several times. I wonder if I should disclose the application for a further degree on my resume cover letter. Oh, okay, that one. I wonder if I should disclose the application for a further degree in my resume cover letter and or job interview. What? If I should disclose the app, like, so you applied for something and you're wondering if you should disclose that in your resume. Okay, well, listen, if you are halfway through or partially way through an educational qualification, you can list it as long as you don't indicate that you have it, right? You could say like, I'm a, medical doctor candidate or something like that, you have to look it up. Like, what's the proper way of expressing this? Like, that it's in process, but you haven't got it yet. Usually it means adding the word candidate behind the thing. I'm a bachelor's of nursing candidate, right? Like that kind of thing. That shows that you're in it, but you haven't completed it. So it is possible to do that, but don't say that you have it. Like, don't list it like it's something you've completed when you haven't. Because if you ever do that and a recruiter ever finds out, they blacklist you because of that. Right? So it's not worth the risk. So is that the question you were wondering about? But I might be misunderstanding what you're saying. So if you could clarify if that's not the thing. Bob says, attention, question for the company's expert. Hofcroft wants his new studies to be part-time. Should he mention his school application for that in his next interview? No, listen. Okay, so if you are applying to go to university part-time or something, and you're also looking for a part-time job. Okay. Now, I understand that in the interest of full disclosure, you might say, well, just so you guys know, I mean, I have applied to be in school part-time, so, I couldn't do this full-time, and, I'll have to work around a school schedule and stuff. I get that, but it's more effective if you just get the job first and then worry about that stuff. If it is part-time, like they said, there shouldn't be an issue. But don't throw in this extra kind of optional thing that could be a problem. You know what I mean? That's not going to help you get the job. It would be better if you didn't mention that at all. Now, if they specifically ask you about it, they say, are you going to be in school? Then you would say yes. But unless that comes up, I wouldn't volunteer that, just so you know, I'm going to have to work around school. It just adds another sort of headache for them, another obstacle for them to hire you, right? So get the job first, then worry about details like that after. If they've advertised it as a part-time job with flexible hours or something, there shouldn't be an issue, right? Get it first, then you have something to discuss. If you reveal it and that eliminates you, what does it matter? You've lost it. So that's what I would say to that. Does that make sense? Ghost, Colorado here. Our local climbers talk about the Mount Everest yeet zones a lot. Green Boots is a real guy, Sally. I know. And he's been there for a long time. Bob says, we got your question rewritten and addressed. Well, good. That only took this Herculean effort of saying about 400 posts, and I eventually got it. This is the problem. You see, I am using Streamlabs OBS as my software to do stream on my computer. And Streamlabs, I'm really not happy with it. It keeps breaking bits of it as we go. And it's got a feed down the side, but whenever someone adds a post, the whole thing moves and you have no control over that. So if I wanted to hold it in a certain place so I can keep track of where I am, it ignores me, and it just, every once in a while, it'll just shift by 10 posts upwards, and then I've lost my place. So I apologize for that. I need to get better software. I'm really disappointed in this company that does this. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense. You guys have had some great questions. I see there's 23 people here right now. If you are looking to get hired, check that out. Okay, I put all my advice in one place, step by step, in an organized way. If you want to get that, and that deals with everything. It deals with resumes, it deals with job interviews, it deals with networking. How to do networking is a big component of that, specifically with templates and exact procedures and all this kind of stuff. For people that are just learning this for the first time, check that out. There's a link in the description underneath the live stream, in the description box. I also have videos on how these courses work so that you know exactly what you're getting into before you pull the trigger. And if you want to learn business, I got that one too. That's the best bang for the buck you'll find anywhere. And then if you're looking to get promoted into upper management, executive management, this is a lot of the communication skills component that you would need to tack on to qualify for those roles, because you, generally speaking, have to have above average communication skills to be in those roles. So if any of that's interesting, check out those courses. They're all linked in the description below. Now, I will be back on Friday. I'm starting to add more of these because I have a bit more time. And quite frankly, these are very easy to do. So whenever I have a bit of time, I'm doing these. So I will be back on Friday to do another episode of Honest HR Nitrous. So that's another opportunity to talk to me and ask me more questions. And hopefully I'll be able to respond to them a bit more efficiently than I did with Bob here and Pofcross. Okay, thanks everyone. I wish you nothing but the best. Remember that there is a gap between how this stuff is supposed to work and how this stuff actually works. Sometimes it's harmless and it's unintentional. Other times it's malicious and it is intentional. And we talk about both here. So best of luck. Thank you so much. Have a good couple of days.